stabilization force. That's the goal here, but it's not going to be easy. Every day will bring new challenges to that, and we recognize those challenges are coming from all sides.
Very quick follow-up there, but who's going to want to be a part of a stabilization force if Israel is effectively using Gaza as a free fire zone?
Well, these are the things these are the things that we're working through right now. That's why it didn't happen yesterday. That's why we didn't, I don't mean yesterday literally, that means why we're not there yet. This is the hard work of diplomacy and peacemaking. Peacemaking isn't just signing a piece of paper, it's actually complying with it. And compliance oftentimes requires, in many cases, in most cases, requires daily, constant follow-up and nurturing. So that is why we are in such a hurry, and I say as a priority, to get to this point where we have the stabilization force in place, overseen by the Board of Peace, and ultimately a Palestinian technocratic entity that can increase in its capability to provide governance. The stronger they are, the weaker Hamas will be in terms of threatening Israel, and I think the more security Israel should feel and the less need for some of these things to happen. But no one's claiming this is going to be easy. We have to work on this every single day. We have people in this building and deployed abroad. This is all they do. 24 hours a day, day after day, elements of the State Department, the Department of War, and all other agencies, including Jared and Steve, and even myself, who talk or do something about. There isn't a day in the last, this was signed 2 months ago, that I haven't had to do something with regards to making progress on the phases of the ceasefire. Yes, ma'am. Right next.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
I'm sorry. I'm going to get to you guys. I'm coming. See, I'm going down the rows like this.
Thank you.
So right behind you, I'm still in that row.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for having the briefing.
Has anyone ever done this where they go like all the rows?
No.
You're going to look so good to your editors. All right, go ahead.
Caroline Lumetta with World News Group. Several faith-based organizations have been calling on the administration to reopen the U.S. refugee admissions program, particularly for religious minorities facing persecution. That includes Afghanistan, Syria, Iran. Is it going to be a goal in 2026 to expand that program again beyond South Afrikaners?
Yeah, so here's the problem, okay? In the last 4 years, we had a flood of people enter this country through a variety of means. So that's what we confronted. We have to stop that, and we did. We've been successful. You see the border secured, the number of illegal entries, it's completely collapsed. And now we're facing a second challenge, and that is we've admitted a lot of people into the United States. And perhaps the overwhelming majority of them are not bad people and so forth. This is all true. But there are people, we know, okay, for a fact, there are people in this country who got in through some form of vetting that was wholly insufficient. And we've seen tragic evidence of that very recently, including people that we claim to have vetted. So, why does that happen? Because there are some places where you can't vet people. You can only vet people on the basis of information you have about them. But that information is oftentimes dependent on whether there's some local authority that actually has any information about them. Okay, so that is the challenge we're facing, which is why the president has sort of put a stop to all of these things until these systems for admitting people into our country can be improved. But I think everyone would understand that after a flood of 15 to 20 million people into our country, almost unrestrained in some extent, over the last 4 years before taking over in January of this year, there's a desire in our country to put a stop to that until we can fix these processes to ensure that not only do we know who's in the country now, but in the future, we're not going to face some of these challenges that we faced in the past. So, look, the United States remains the most generous country in the world when it comes to legal immigration. This year alone, close to 1 million people will enter this country legally and have their green card and go to war. But we do have a right, like every sovereign country does, to know who you are, why you're coming, what you've done in the past, and what we think you might or might not do in the future. We have a right. We have a right to make sure that you're not going to come to this country and pose a burden on our social safety network. All of these things are rights of sovereign countries. A bunch of sovereign countries in the world do it. Most of the countries in the world have far more restrictive immigration policies than the United States has ever had. But we are in a special period right now. This is not like business as usual. This is, right now, we are less than a year removed from the most reckless migratory incompetence in American history, where a flood of people and mass migration events entered the United States. And they can claim all they want that they vetted people. This is just not true. Some of them were cursory vetting, and in some cases, you couldn't vet them because the countries or places they came from had no documents upon which they could be vetted on. So that program will be studied, and it will not be restarted at the scale and scope it was until we are comfortable that it is one that we know everyone who's coming in and who they are and whether they meet the criteria for admission to the United States.
But do you have any sort of
timeline for that? Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. A follow-up on the conversation between President Trump and Maduro, because the day after the conversation, the president said he was going to be meeting that gentleman very soon. Is this still being considered? Is the president still considering that? Is still a chance for diplomacy on Venezuela? And also, any role that you see Brazil could play? Because just a few weeks ago, President Lula spoke with President Trump and Nicolás Maduro, and he offered to help to mediate the conversation.
Yeah, I'm not going
And,
to comment on any, as I said, I'm not going to comment on the president's talks. I will just point you to the fact that the thing about this president, that I think you've seen, is he's willing to talk to anybody. He's willing, he doesn't view talks as a concession. But I don't have any update to you on what comes next in that regard. I have no reason to express skepticism or optimism about it. I'm just not going to comment on what the president has available to him as options across the range of options that include diplomatic options.
And how about the conversation with Lula?
I mean, I think he said to us what he has said publicly, and that he has a willing to play a positive role in that regard. You know, the president's had 2 phone conversations and 1 meeting with President Lula. I think we've made progress on some things, including on trade. We have more work to be done. The 2 presidents got along. We felt that was important in terms of those conversations. I've talked to Mauro, their foreign minister, on it, including this earlier this week. And we have a lot of issues in common with Brazil that we'd like to work together on, and strong links. Being from Florida, as an example, I know how important Brazil has been to us as a partner. We've had some disagreements on a couple things over the years as well. But I feel like that relationship is on a positive trajectory, but as far as its role in Venezuela, I don't have anything to provide you on that today of any specificity.
Just a
Yes,
quick
sir.
follow-up on
Thank
the
you.
tariffs, political tariffs
No,
on
I got to
Brazil.
get to him,
Okay.
okay?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you very much for doing this. On phase 2 in Gaza, when is the soonest that we could see that being implemented? And then separately, you said at the top that you want the US to play the role of mediator that brings about the avoidance of war and ending conflicts. How do you square that position with a possible military intervention in Venezuela? Thank you.
Well, first of all, a couple things. Wanting to pursue peace and secure peace does not necessarily come at the expense of your national interest. We reserve the right and retain the option of defending our national interest. Now, in the case, again, we're going to talk about Venezuela. Let's be clear. Maduro has made multiple deals with elements around the world, including with the Biden administration. Okay, Maduro made a deal with the Biden administration, and here's the deal he made. And I only say this to you not because we want to get back to that deal, but just as an example of why the guy cannot be trusted to keep deals. It's a problem. Okay, somebody, breaks deals multiple times. You have a right to be skeptical they're ever going to keep the deal. He made a deal, and as part of that deal, they lifted sanctions. They released his 2 nephews from federal custody after their conviction. They sent back his bagman, Alex Saab, and all these sorts of things. He released political prisoners, and he promised to have free and fair elections. He didn't have free and fair elections. He rearrested or exiled most of those political prisoners, so he pocketed all the benefits and lived to none of those commitments. So, look, it's hard to have and do a deal with someone who never keeps a deal. Now, on the broader perspective of what you're asking about, let's be mature here. Yes, there are issues where we want to pursue peace if that is possible, but we also have our national interest. If we're not going to reach a peace deal with narco-trafficking bans. We're not. We can't reach a peace deal with MS-13. We can't reach a peace deal with Tren de Aragua. We can't reach a peace deal with the ELN or the FARC that are still pumping drugs into the United States or any of their cartels in Mexico. You can't do a peace deal with these people any more than you could do a peace deal with the mafia. So I think it's important to understand that's different between warring factions and nation states around the world where we feel like maybe we could act as a bridge to bringing about the differences. But when you're talking about things that directly implicate the national interest of the United States, and no one can argue that transnational criminality and terrorism in our hemisphere is not a threat to the national interest of the United States, we reserve the right and have the right to utilize every element of national power to defend the national interest of the United States. And no one can dispute that. And every country in the world reserves the same option. We just simply have more power than some of them do.
And phase 2, Gaza?
Oh, phase 2 Gaza, yeah. I mean, we got to complete phase 1 to get to phase 2. That's why we're working every day to get there. Look, guys, if this stuff was easy, it would have been done already a long time ago. This is a complex situation. No one would dispute it, but it's important. What we achieved already, what the president achieved ending that war already was something no one thought was possible. Everyone thought that the last episode was going to be an Israeli incursion into Gaza City that would lead to massive loss of life and the hostages would never be reunited with their families. And today, as we speak, all the hostages that were living are back, all but I believe one of the bodies has been returned. No one would have believed that 6 months ago. So that in and of itself, but that is not the end of the story. We want to continue on this. But what we're talking about is dealing with something that no one has been able to solve in 30 or 40 years. No one. And it's going to take some time. But I feel generally optimistic that we have the right people at the table with the right motivations to make it happen. But no one is claiming to you that this is going to be just a straight-up trajectory. It's going to have its ups and downs. It's going to have its, good days and bad days. The important point is that the momentum and the trajectory on it is a positive trajectory, and we're investing, high levels of our government every day in trying to make that happen. But we can't do it alone. We have all these other partners that we have to include. So I would focus you on, let's get the board of peace in place and announced. Let's get the technocratic Palestinian group in place, and then let's get the stabilization force in place. And then we can move on to the other elements, the phase 2 and phase 3 of the plan, that hopefully will be what will be enduring. And the work of putting phase 2 and phase 3 in place is going to extend far beyond the next 3 years. I mean, this is a generational commitment, but we want to leave those pieces in place for the next administration to continue to build upon, even as we achieve phase 1 and parts of phase 2 during this administration. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary, some of your former Democratic former Senate colleagues who considered you one of their most trusted bipartisan partners have, since you joined the Trump administration, accused you of abandoning some of your former principles and positions. And 3 or 4 have said they regret voting for you.
Well, I had 99 votes. I could have spared 4.
What's your response to that? And more importantly, how do you think about building and maintaining bipartisan consensus and cooperation on foreign policy at this moment, especially because that will be necessary to sustain President Trump's legacy after he leaves office?
I mean, we live in a very different time, unfortunately. I engage with senators, for example, from both parties. We saw a bunch of them the other day all the time, and obviously, but politics today is very different than it was 10 or 20 years ago. It just is. I'm not in that anymore. I'm no longer in a political office, but I know political offices. I served 14 years in the Senate, and politics is real, right? I mean, there's also not a lot of benefit to a Democratic senator saying what a great guy Marco Rubio is in this current political environment, or anyone in the Trump administration for that matter. So all I will tell you is I get up every day, we go to work, we get work done, we do cooperate and work with. They don't always agree with everything we're doing, but I have a lot of people in the Senate, particularly chairmen of key committees that we interact with. There's things people can say and do in the public that because of politics, in private, that they can't say or do in public. But I don't know what else to comment on that other than one more point, and that is, I think this is important. I think people have lost sort of their mindset here a little bit, okay? The foreign policy, the State Department is not its own government, okay? The Secretary of State is not its own government. I'm appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate, and then, or nominated by the President, confirmed by the Senate, and then appointed by the President. But at the end of the day, the person the people of the United States elected to be the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief is Donald J. Trump. That's who they elected. And my job, and the job of the people in our administration, is to implement the President's foreign policy. We provide advice, we provide counsel, but ultimately our job is to take what the President wants to do, take his vision, and implement it. Come up with options for implementing the President's vision. That's my job today. When I was a senator, I represented the state of Florida. Today, I am the Secretary of State for Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States, and my job is to implement the President's foreign policy, provide advice, provide counsel, provide ideas, provide for opportunities and ways in which his foreign policy can be implemented. But in the end, our job is to implement that. And why people think that somehow foreign policy can be divorced from our republic? That's not the way our Constitution works. The Constitution does not say you elect the President of the United States and then you put in place a State Department to undermine the President if the person who's the Secretary of State doesn't agree with him. That's ridiculous. That's stupid, really. And I don't know why anybody would think that. So that's the job I have, and that's the job I'm proud to do. I think we've made a lot of progress. We have a lot more work to do. All right, on our row right there from Italy, right? I know you from the...
Yes.
Do you cover us now, or are you on Capitol Hill still?
No, everything.
Both. So you're like a
Capitol
one-man
and-
bureau
as,
for the
as
whole
well
thing.
as
All right.
here.
You're like me. You have 2 jobs.
Secretary.
Good.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Mr. Secretary. So the United States, on one hand, are mediating with Russia to end the war in Ukraine, but on the other hand, the Russian foreign minister yesterday or the day before said it would be a fatal mistake from the U.S. To block the oil tanks from Venezuela and trying to overthrow the Maduro regime. So what kind of what's the assess that you're doing, and are there any safeguards in place to avoid escalation with Russia? And then I have another question about the Hezbollah, sir.
Yeah, we're not concerned about an escalation with Russia with regards to Venezuela. I mean, we've always expected them to provide rhetorical support for the Maduro regime. I think they have their hands full in Ukraine. And if he's watching, Sergey, Merry Christmas. And but at the end of the day, I expected them to say what they were going to say. The rhetorical support, we understand what that's at. It's not a factor in how we consider this whole thing.
And then, if I may, about the Hezbollah, I know you already answered, but I wanted to ask you if the US administration is considering a broader military support involving also potential Arab partners, not only in providing weapons, but also going into the field to disarm the Hezbollah if the diplomatic talks will fail.
Well, I've not heard anyone sort of suggest that at the level of detail that you've talked about. I think regionally, for example, if you talk to the Syrian authorities, they're very concerned about Hezbollah. I think most of the countries in the Gulf region view Hezbollah as an agent of Iranian influence and Iranian action. But as far as what you're discussing, which is sort of a coalition of armed units going into Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah, I've not heard that proposed by anybody. Perhaps you have, but I haven't, and that's not certainly something we've been.
Senator Graham.
Oh, okay.
Was talking about this
one
at
of
the
my former
Congress.
colleagues,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you should ask Lindsey about how he's going to put that together, because, but we just haven't heard it. I'm not saying you may not hear that one day in the future, but I think what is clear, and I think maybe perhaps what Lindsey is speaking to, is that it is clear that if you talk to leaders in the region in all these countries, they all have the same goal, perhaps not, which is to ensure that Hezbollah can no longer play the role that they've played in the past, not just threatening Israel, but being an agent, an open agent, really a proxy of Iranian influence in the region. All
Thank
right.
you.
Next. I didn't get to you. Oh, I'm in the new row. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. You have previously said in the past that you and the administration are committed to fixing the backlog of visas for foreign-born priests and other religious workers, whether that be through the Religious Workforce Act, or through maybe a standalone process. Is there any update you can give on the status of that and what's being done to
Yeah, I think we'll have
hopefully
more to
fix this
announce
issue?
on that early next month. Yeah, early next month.
Okay.
We've worked closely with a lot of the religious authorities to do that. Obviously, depending on the denomination, we're not discriminating in favor of one versus another. Some denominations are more professionalized in terms of what they're able to provide us with and sort of information versus others. Some of it depends the country they're coming from, because, we have to be careful not to be waiving, we have country-specific requirements depending on the country they're coming from. But I think we have a good plan in place to put that into effect. And I know we've worked with a number of denominations in that process. Obviously, one of the big users of that system is the Catholic Church in the U.S., and so we've worked with the Conference of Bishops. And I think we're going to get to a good place. We don't have it ready yet. All this takes time to put together, but we're moving quickly, and I think we'll have something positive about that at some point next month, hopefully in the early part of next month.
Thank you
Yes,
so
sir.
much.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles said that the U.S. would need congressional approval to conduct ground strikes in Venezuela. Do you share that view? And on your response today on regime change, Wiles already acknowledged that the point of the boat strikes was to pressure Maduro, i.e. have him leave. Why not just acknowledge that this is a regime change?
Do you have the quote she said?
That this is
No, but do you have the quote?
to cry uncle.
Yeah,
was
so,
the
okay,
quote, yeah.
so cry uncle, all right? I guess in Spanish you would have to say tío. But I think, I don't know how that, you can interpret it any way you want. But at the end of the day, it is clear that the current status quo with the Venezuelan regime is intolerable for the United States. The status quo, that they operate and cooperate with terrorist organizations against the national interest of the United States. Not just cooperate, but partner with and participate in activities that threaten the national interest of the United States. So yes, our goal is to change that dynamic. And that's why the president's doing what he's doing. Change that dynamic by ensuring that no one wants to get on drug boats anymore. People were just going out there, openly without any fear of the reaper. And now I think people understand, it's not a good idea. By the way, we haven't had a strike in the Caribbean basin in almost 5 weeks. Do you know why? It's not because we stopped looking. It's because no one wants to get on a boat anymore and do that. So it's been effective at cutting that down. Now there's been strikes in the Pacific. So the bottom line is that, sure, our goal is to, what's the point of doing something? But the change, people want to focus on regime this and this and that. The goal here is very simple. The national interest of the United States. The President of the United States was elected to protect the American people, to protect America. That's what he was elected to do. It's one of his fundamental promises that Donald J. Trump made when he was elected President of the United States is, I am going to protect this country. Protect us from what? From the threat of terrorism, from threats to our economy, and from threats these drug organizations and these terrorist organizations pose against the United States. And if you are an ally, a friend, a partner, or cooperate or participate in activities that threaten the United States, you're going to have a problem with President Trump. I think the only shocking thing here is that a lot of people say that. People run all the time for office. I'm going to take on the cartels. I'm going to do this. He's actually doing it. He's not doing anything he didn't say he was not going to do during this campaign. He said he was going to go after the cartels. And now he's going after the cartels, and everybody's shocked. Don't be shocked. This is a man who was elected president because he says and then he does. He doesn't just say and then forget about it.
In congressional approval on land strikes, do you think that the United States does need to go to Congress in order to conduct land strikes in Venezuela?
Well, look, I'm not going to speculate about things that haven't happened and may never happen. I'm not going to speculate on that. All I'm going to tell you is that two things. And I remind Congress all the time. By the way, I was very consistent on this position because it was my position when I was in the Senate. Number one, no administration, Republican or Democrat, has ever accepted the War Powers Act as being constitutional. That said, multiple administrations, including this one, have sought congressional approval and or certainly congressional notification of actions taken. Why? Because American action is always strongest when it has the buy-in and the participation of a broad set of actors. Now, given our current political climate, that's not always easy because we do have people today in politics that are against everything that President Trump is for. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if they themselves had the same position. If it's President Trump's idea, they're against it reflexively. Okay? That's the nature of the current climate in our politics. But I can tell you that to this point, nothing has happened that requires us to notify Congress or get congressional approval or cross the threshold into war. We have very strong legal opinions. We have now briefed Capitol Hill 23 times, 23 briefings, bipartisan briefings on Capitol Hill. I have personally participated in 6 of those 23 at the highest levels of the committee, but then the full House and then the full Senate, which, by the way, are always interesting. Okay, get it. I've been there before, okay? So I was part of this thing in the past as well. But you do this briefing, you answer all their questions, and then they go out and tell people, we heard nothing, we saw nothing, that we were pleased with. They already had their answer before they went in, but we do them anyways. And we continue to do them. Not to mention the individual calls I've had with leaders in Congress, and I'm not going to disclose what those are. So everybody over there knows what we're doing, they know why we're doing it, and we've kept Congress fully apprised, and we'll continue to do so. Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The settlers' violence is rampant in the West Bank.
The what is, I'm sorry?
The settlers,
Yes,
the Israeli
okay, yeah.
settlers' violence in the West Bank is being escalating, is increasing. Also, Israel is building around 20 settlements unit. Doesn't this undermine your own effort in the peace process? And also, if I may, on Gaza, the humanitarian situation is dire. The babies have been frozen to death because of the weather. Tents have been flooded. Is this anything that the United States can do to alleviate the suffering of the civilians in Gaza?
Yeah. In the case of the West Bank, we have, and you've seen our embassy even has put out statements and comments about specific incidents there that we're concerned about, that we do think, create a point of strong friction in the broader effort. And our own embassy, and Ambassador Huckabee has spoken to this as recently as a couple weeks ago, very firmly, I believe. And so we'll continue to communicate that as we have and make our opinion known in regards to its impact on the broader challenges. In the case of humanitarian, absolutely. I mean, this is the reason why that group is set up there every single day. We've been successful at opening new corridors. We want to continue to see that increase. We want to continue to see the flow of aid increase into those parts of Gaza that are still under Hamas control. But it also goes back, not to sound like a broken record, to why it is so critical to have the border peace put in place and the Palestinian technocratic group put in place. Because that allows us now, when you have this technocratic Palestinian group in place and a stabilization force to provide security, it now allows us to have someone we can work with to turn over the humanitarian aid to and have them be the ones that help distribute it along with these international partners. That's what the point we're trying to get to, that we can get to a point where that is, and part of the thing with humanitarian aid is also security. Someone has to provide security for these convoys as they go in, because oftentimes they have been attacked, they've been looted, they've been so forth. We don't have a force that can do that right now unless the Israelis are going to go in, and that would violate the ceasefire. But if we have a stabilization force on the ground, they could provide security. And then the technical side of it, the logistical side of it, along with the international partners, is what the Palestinian Technocratic Organization can do. That is why we are in such a hurry to finalize that phase of this deal so that the aid can flow. And not just aid, then we can move from aid to reconstruction, which is the goal everybody has. You want to reach a point in which you're not providing aid because Gaza has an economy, and it's not an economy controlled by Hamas. But we can't get to that stage until we can secure the place. And that's why we're in such a hurry to finalize that phase of the deal. Yes, sir.
Vladimir Putin today had
I
his
thought you
own-
were introducing yourself. No. I'm Vladimir
Definitely
Putin.
not. Definitely not. Vladimir
So what are you
Putin-
doing here? Go ahead,
Nick
I'm
Schiffer
sorry.
in PBS NewsHour. Vladimir Putin had his own end-of-year press
Today?
conference today.
Oh, he's trying to step on my message.
Yeah, his went, I think, 4 hours, so we got,
well,
we
don't
got at
worry
least
about
3
that.
hours. And he said he was willing to end the war in
I
Ukraine.
bet you he didn't do it in Spanish.
He did not.
All right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. He said he was willing to end the war in Ukraine based on principles he had outlined last summer, and that included a complete Ukrainian withdrawal from 4 regions, most of which are not occupied by Russia, recognition of occupied Russian territory in Ukraine, and the complete lifting of sanctions. That goes beyond some of the recent conversations you've been having. So do you think Putin is serious about peace, and is the U.S. willing to recognize occupied Russian territory in Ukraine?
Look, I think ultimately there is what people say, and I'm not claiming that that's not his position. I'm just saying there's what people say and then what people do. In the end, we're not going to base our approach to finding peace here on the basis simply of what people are saying. We're going to base it on what people are willing to agree to, what countries are willing to agree to. Our role is very simple. We try to understand what the Russian position, how much can they give and what do they have to have. We understand the Ukrainian position, and we try to find whether those two things can overlap. Maybe that happens this week. Maybe that happens next month. Maybe that's not ready for a few months. That's not up to us. That's up to the two sides. In the end, it's up to them to make a deal. We can't force Ukraine to make a deal. We can't force Russia to make a deal. They have to want to make a deal. The role we're trying to play is a role of figuring out whether there's any overlap here that they can agree to. And that's what we've invested a lot of time and energy and continue to do so. That may not be possible. I hope it is. I hope it can get done this month before the end of the year. I want it to end as soon as possible. I know the president is deeply committed to helping it end. I know this, though, we're the only ones that can do it. If we were not involved, no one would be talking to both sides. The UN can't do it. But who else is going to do it? Nobody in Europe can do it. So I think I think the one thing people should have is an expression of gratitude that President Trump is willing to continue to engage in this despite the fact that we haven't yet gotten the outcome that he hopes to have, because no one else could do it. And so that's what we're trying to do here. So this whole narrative that we're trying to force something on Ukraine is silly. We can't. There's no peace deal that Ukraine. There is no peace deal unless Ukraine agrees to it. But there's also no peace deal unless Russia agrees to it. We are just trying to find whether there's common ground that we can make happen. And maybe that's not possible. Maybe it is. Maybe that's not possible right now. But we don't think our work could potentially serve as a baseline for that in the future. Maybe it is possible now. We're going to continue to test it and see where we can get to.
Is the U.S. willing to recognize occupied territory?
I'm not going to speak on any specifics of any deal because we're not going to be able to negotiate a peace deal, especially one like this, in the media. Suffice it to say, let me just put it to you this way. There can't be a peace deal unless Ukraine agrees to it. And there can't be a peace deal, of course, unless Russia agrees to it. But remember that. Any peace deal is one that Ukraine has to agree to because they're a combatant. If Ukraine says we don't agree to it, there won't be peace. So our job is not to force anything on anyone. It is to try to figure out if we can nudge both sides to a common place. And guys, in a conflict like this, in a war like this, that's not easy. It takes a lot of time. We're going to have some patience with it, unfortunately. It's already gone longer. But understand why the president cares about this, okay? Because let's be honest here, and I'm not trying to diminish this, okay? Because it's an interesting position to be in. The United States only provides, we don't provide weapons to Russia, we only provide weapons to Ukraine. The United States doesn't sanction Ukraine, it's only sanctioned Russia. And yet we are still the only country in the world that can talk to both sides. So let's be clear about the role we played in this so far. I mean, we're the only ones that can. So I don't mean to be dismissive of why this matters or it's important, because this is going on in another continent. We've got issues in our own hemisphere we need to be dealing with. That if you were to ask prioritization, I would argue that something in our hemisphere from our national interest is more important than something in another continent. But it doesn't make Ukraine and Russia unimportant. We care about it. That's why we're involved in it. But by the same token, why does the president care? I'll tell you why. This week, 9,000 people will die, including like 5,000 or 6,000 weekly Russian casualties, okay, in a war. This is a bloody, nasty conflict. In the same time, the entire electric grid, the entire infrastructure of Ukraine is being destroyed almost as fast as it's being rebuilt. Every week that goes by, the cost of rebuilding that country gets exponentially higher. It is now becoming generational reconstruction. This is a very damaging war that's going to have incredible implications. There are now hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, probably maybe in millions, who have not lived in Ukraine in years. They've been displaced to other countries. The implications of this long-term for Ukraine are dramatic, and for Russia too, but for Ukraine, if we're focused on them. This is why the president wants to end it. He thinks it's a bloody, nasty, horrifying war, And he doesn't like wars. He really doesn't like wars. He thinks they're a waste of money, time, and talent. And he wants this one to end. And we're doing everything we can to end it. And it may or may not be possible, but we're certainly going to keep trying. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I promise you we're going to go through here. Do you have a deadline or something? I know, but let me get to the roads, because if I break up the road thing, you're going to screw up the whole plan I have for today. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. If I can turn internally for a moment, a recent survey by the American Foreign Service Association found strikingly low morale among career diplomats in the U.S., some of whom reported that they feel like they can't freely express their opinions, that their candidate input is not welcome, and many of them are saying that they're actually thinking about career changes. I know you talked at the top about how change can be disruptive, but I wonder, how much does this concern you? Do you possibly see this as a feature, not a bug, or would you be happy to see people leave so that you can bring in a new crop of people? And then just briefly on your own role, you have 2 jobs right now. Your travel schedule seems a bit lighter than your recent predecessors. You didn't attend the last NATO foreign ministers gathering and had your deputy go. Are you fully performing the job of Secretary of State? Are you more of a national security advisor than a Secretary of State? Can you talk about that?
Well, first of all, on the travel schedule, we have a lot of leaders keep coming here, too. So you talk about NATO, great example on NATO. I already went to a NATO meeting this year of all the foreign ministers. Then I went to the leaders meeting, which not all the foreign ministers were at. And then on top of that, that week is the week we had Rwanda and the DRC coming to the United States on a deal that I was working in. So as far as the travel schedule is concerned, we have a lot of leaders constantly coming here. We have leader meetings every single week for the most part up until last week. So there's a lot of work to be done. On the Foreign Service, we have very talented people here. I saw that report somewhere. That's from the union. It's from a union survey. All I can tell you is that today Foreign Service officers are more empowered at the regional bureau than they've ever been. I get descent cables. I get cables every day from all over the world that provide the baseline for a lot of the ideas that we pursue. There isn't a week that goes by that I don't send back 2 or 3 cables with notes about, let's turn this into a policy proposal. We are changing this place so that it is our missions in the field that are not just driving directives from the top down, but also ideas from the bottom up. And I'm very proud of that, and I think that's going to lead and pay huge dividends for future secretaries of state long after I'm gone. So, yes, sir.
Thank you, Secretary. Human rights organizations report that 2025 has seen the highest number of executions in the Islamic Republic of Iran in over 2 decades. What specific new measures is the State Department taking to ensure that human rights abuses, specifically this surge of state-sanctioned execution, do not become a secondary priority in your dealings with Tehran?
Well, ultimately, look, we have very deep systemic disagreements with the regime in Iran. And it's part of one of, if not the most sanctioned country in the world, one of the most sanctioned countries in the world. There isn't a week that goes by, or at least 2-3 times a month, I'm authorizing some new sanction on some new entity related to Iran. I don't think anyone could argue that this administration has been friendly towards them. So we continue to feature these things because it tells us about who they are. In the case of some of these executions that you're talking about, some of them, by the way, were in the aftermath of the war with Israel, where they went through and have jailed people and accused people of being informants and spies and things of that nature. But we're under no illusion, and every year we put out a report that outlines this, and we've been pretty consistent in our messaging. Our problem with the Iranian regime isn't simply, obviously it's predominantly the people. I said it in my hearing a year ago in the Senate, I say it now, I know of no nation on earth where there is such a difference between a regime that governs the country and the people who live there every single day. That regime is not reflective of the people who live in Iran, who are the inheritors of a proud and long cultural legacy and a proud history. And then you've got a clerical radical regime that has driven and taken the wealth of that country and used it not to enrich secure their people and their future, not to make sure they have enough water and electricity. They've used their money to sponsor terrorist organizations all over the world. That's what they've used their money for. So we're going to continue to consistently point that out.
Secretary,
second. I'm sorry, I got to go because I'm getting everybody today.
Regarding Europe, you said that Europe was not going to be able to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. There's been some disengagement. There's some push within the European Union to either not comply with the increase in defense spending that the United States has been promoting, or also some European countries like Spain promoting closer ties to China. or going to China, or inviting more investment from China, or even Chinese technology in critical infrastructure. Are you concerned at all about this path? And
No, I mean, the country's made a commitment in NATO at a meeting I was at, where they made the 5% pledge, which is a dramatic and historic pledge, with the exception of Spain, of course, who didn't make that pledge. And we've had no indication from any of the countries that agreed to that they're not going to do it, because it's in their own interest. I mean, it's in their own interest. The bottom line is, increasing their defense capacity is in their interest, because it's their defense. As far as like opening up to China, look, one of the biggest problems Europe faces is they're being flooded with cheap Chinese goods, including Chinese cars. They're being flooded. Their own industrial base is under attack by unfair Chinese practices economically. So, I don't know what the rhetoric you're pointing to or the examples, but I mean, that's a threat that Europe faces, and they need a rebalancing as well. They're also, like we are, experiencing disruptions to supply chains and things at the economic realm that are very problematic and dangerous for national security. So we would expect them to act at their national interests, both continentally and individually as their own countries. All right, we got to speed it up. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Annalise Nielsen from Sky News Australia. In your national security strategy, you've warned Europe about civilizational erasure. When you've been watching what's been happening in Australia with the rise of anti-Semitism and our government's response to the Bondi massacre, our Prime Minister's dodged direct questions on Islamic extremism, but then unprompted evoked right-wing extremism as a threat. Do you have any message to Australia about civilizational erasure, and why is America watching?
Look, I just think it's very simple, and that is that any mass migration is highly disruptive to any country. We talked about it here in the United States. When you experience mass migration, I don't talk about immigration, I'm talking about mass migration. Okay, mass migration is a negative thing. It's not positive. And it's very difficult for any society to absorb and assume hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people over a short period of time, especially if they come from halfway around the world. There are cultural and assimilations issues related to that, et cetera. And so these are concerns that it's concerns I have about our own country primarily. It's been a priority of this administration to address this. But I think it's a growing concern in Europe. I mean, there are other voices in Europe and obviously in Australia as well that have expressed concern about this. These are facts. This doesn't make you anti-anybody. What it makes is you do have, as a sovereign country, the right to control how many people you absorb, how many people you allow in, and who those people are. This is a very basic sovereign right. Okay? It doesn't mean you don't allow any people in. There are people coming into this country every day to visit, to work, to live permanently, but you have to know who they are, and you have to have some limits and controls over what those numbers are. And obviously, because of some of the things we've seen, mass migration over the last decade has been highly disruptive, not just to the United States, but also to continental Europe, and in some cases in the Indo-Pacific as well. So I just think this is a real challenge that multiple Western advanced industrialized countries are facing, and I think it's pronounced in parts of Europe as well, and obviously, at least on the basis of your question, appear to be a challenge as well in Australia. All right, to the next row. Yes, ma'am. Hold on, Andrea, right behind you. I'm going to get to everybody. Go. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask.
You don't have a question? Okay, no, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
On Ukraine this weekend, the meetings with the Ukrainian delegation and the U.S. delegation, are you planning to participate
It's
in
in
those
Miami.
meetings?
They're starting today and tomorrow. I may be there tomorrow for a portion of it. There's another one happening today, but that one is with the Turks and the Qataris and the UAE on the Gaza plan. So if I'm not there, because I have things we have to do here today, like talk to you guys, I think tomorrow, since it's in Miami as well. So, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Timothy Unrose with the Washington Examiner. Going back to the previous question about Europe, and I believe the Sky News reporter referenced civilizational erasure, which is a term that has been used by both the White House and the State Department. Both the White House and the State Department have made kind of recurring overtures to Europe as a civilization that is in some sort of danger and that should join with the United States as a sort of Western civilizational bloc. And it seems to be a recurring priority. However, with the release of the National Security Strategy, many European leaders, leader of Germany, members of the EU, of the European Parliament, have found it totally unacceptable or offensive or question the allyship of the United States with the rhetoric that was used. So I just wonder if the United States is correct in that these policies like mass migration will lead to civilizational erasure. Is it possible to save European civilization if the governments simply don't want to be saved?
How has this alliance long been described? As the Western alliance, right? What is it and it's not just me saying, you go to these NATO meetings, you meet with people, what they will tell you is our shared history, our shared legacy, our shared values, our shared priorities. That's what they talk about as the reason for this alliance. Well, if you erase your shared history, your shared culture, your shared ideology, your shared priorities, your shared principles, then you just have a straight up defense agreement. That's all you have. So what I'm trying to point to, and what we've tried to point to, is very simple. That is, at the bedrock and at the cornerstone of our relationship, with example with Europe, is the fact that we do have a shared culture, a shared civilization, a shared experience, and shared values and principles on things like human rights, on freedom, on liberty, on democracy, on all sorts of on the rights of the individual, on all these sorts of things that we in this nation are the inheritors of in many cases, because many of these ideas that led to the founding of our country found their genesis in some of these places in the Western Alliance. If you take that away, if that's wiped out because for whatever reason it's no longer a priority, I do think it puts a strain and threatens the alliance in the long term and in the big picture. Now, whatever internal politics causes people to dispute this, I'm not going to comment on, other than to tell you that I do think that at the core of these special relationships we have is the fact that we have shared history, shared values, shared civilizational principles that we should be unapologetic about. This is a nation that was founded on Western principles, like liberty, the value of and the right of the individual, the right of self-governance. These are all Western values. Now, others may have adopted it in different parts of the world, but they emanate from Western history. And it's something that we should be unapologetic about. Why would we be apologetic about it? Anyone who doesn't recognize, for example, that many of the features of our system of government find their root in Roman and Greek history is a fool. It's just not true. And so I think that we need to understand and embrace that, not negate it. And I think that's what we're pointing to here, is that we are concerned that particularly in parts of Western Europe, those things that underpin our alliance and our tie to them could be under threat in the long term. And by the way, there are leaders in those countries that recognize that as well. Some say it openly, some say it privately. In the eastern and southern part of Europe, they're much more open about it. Nonetheless, it is a factor that needs to be addressed. Yes, ma'am.
Was the New York Post. So you said earlier that you don't see a surrender happening anytime soon when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. Putin says he will accept nothing less than an unconditional surrender, but if this latest intensive push for peace talks fails, is there anything that the U.S. can do to make Russia want to end its war? And then secondly, some of the most major foreign policy issues, from Venezuela, Iran, Ukraine, Israel, have been assigned special envoys who do not report directly to the State Department, which obviously has a larger view of how these conflicts affect each other. How intimately has State been involved with these envoys' strategies and actions this year? And do you see State taking a larger role in these kind of day-to-day negotiations?
In action, all of it is strongly coordinated. It's one of the benefits of also being the National Security Advisor, is it allows us to also organize the interagency. Every single one of these envoys, I speak about Steve Woodcock in particular, who's a phenomenal person, very smart, very talented, he doesn't get paid to do this job, he does it for free. And he invests a tremendous amount of time, full time on this thing, traveling all over the world, doing all kinds of things. Okay, but Steve doesn't do anything independently. He relies on the interagency. He gets support from Treasury, sometimes from Commerce, certainly from the Department of War, and from the State Department. In fact, he's staffed in many of these visits by State Department folks, and including the ones in Miami. Especially as we get to the technical parts of these agreements. So the synergy there is very tight across the board. And so I think that's just not factual.
I was referring to Envoy Grinnell with Venezuela and some of those conflicts earlier this year that really kind of weren't helpful in getting towards the release of the prisoners.
Yeah, look, everything that's been done in this administration has been coordinated in some form or fashion. You guys don't see it all because I know everybody wants foreign policy to be 100% transparent, but sometimes it really can't be because there are sensitivities, because there are diplomatic sensitivities, because things people are willing to agree to in private, they may not be willing to do so in public. There's all kinds of things that have to happen in order to achieve outcomes. Sometimes they work, sometimes certain approaches work, sometimes they don't. But that's not new to this administration. That's been true throughout history. And but at the end of the day, I feel like we have a very good team of people that work very closely together on all of this. And the key is every single one of these conflicts, every single one of these issues are all multidisciplinary. Okay? There is no such thing as any one of these things that we're dealing with. Again, going back to the case, let's just use Ukraine as an example. In the case of Ukraine, it involved Treasury with regards to the minerals deal. It involves Commerce to some extent. It most certainly involves the Department of War in terms of not just battlefield assessments, but the sale of weaponry through Pearl, et cetera. It involves the Department of State in terms of everything from interpreters to the technical work of actually putting words to paper that would make sense in an agreement and supporting these visits. We had a very important meeting in Geneva, hosted at our embassy, supported by diplomatic personnel that were involved in doing that, and a lot of the follow-up as well that has to happen with some of these things. You know, peace deals aren't just, in the case of Gaza, strongly supported. We actually, we took our ambassador in Yemen, who can't be in Yemen, Fagan, and assigned him for 8 weeks on that portfolio so that we could have someone there to help navigate and coordinate all the technical aspects. You can reach a peace agreement in concept, but then someone's got to sit down and write down the technical language and the specificity, and they rely on the professionals in this department and other government agencies, depending on the subject matter. So, look, I think in any new administration, there's a learning curve early on. People are still getting onboarded. You may not even have people Senate confirmed yet in these positions. Maybe you haven't even hired some unfilled spots. But I think certainly in the second half of last year, I'm very proud and very pleased at the synergy that we've established on all of these things and that continue to establish it. Another one that's doing a great job is Mossad Boulos. I mean, he's out there every day working with our Africa Bureau. They're very involved in this, on trying to deal with Sudan, on trying to deal with the Rwanda DRC. So we have a good team of people that work very well together and very collaboratively, and we're going to build on that in the new year. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. Shelby Talcott with Semaphore. Vanity Fair quoted you as wondering whether Putin just wants the entirety of Ukraine. I'm curious if that's still a question for you, and how confident are you in being able to reach a peace agreement if that is a question? And then along those lines, is there a deadline for Russia and Ukraine to come to an agreement before this administration walks away?
Yeah, I'm not in any position to give you deadlines on anything. And as far as that quote, that's a quote the president has said publicly, which is, he has said 3 things. I thought it was going to be the easiest one, and it's turned out to be the hardest. I don't know if Putin wants to do a deal or if Putin wants to take the whole country. These are things he has said openly. And, you know, I think that's, I don't even remember when I talked to the guy from that magazine, but, you know, for much of the early part of this year, one of the things we were trying to deduce is exactly what is it that Russia wants to achieve. We know what they wanted to achieve initially when the war began. They haven't achieved those objectives. There's a new set of objectives now. I mean, part of reaching an agreement is trying to understand, I've already said this, what both sides want or need and what they're willing to give. And so I think that was a question that many in the administration had early on, is defining what the Russian position, what exactly do they really, not what they say they publicly want, but what they publicly want and privately want are the same thing. That's part of the, and the same is true on the Ukrainian side, by the way. What could they actually live with? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? What are their red lines? That's how you put a deal together. You have to sort of figure out if the two sides overlap at some point. Sometimes some deals are just not ready. Sometimes the timing is perfect. You have to put it together. If you look at what happened with Gaza, that looked intractable. And then a series of events occurred that made it possible. That, for example, the strike inside of Qatar that the Israelis took at the time, you know, was a sort of a dramatic thing, but in some ways it sort of set in motion a sense of urgency to bring this thing to an end before it spread. So sometimes you just have to be ready for a change in circumstances or conditions that allow progress to be made. But these things are hard to do. They take a lot of time. Sometimes it takes some patience. It's just unfortunate that you know that every day that goes by, more people are died and more people die and more things are destroyed. Yes, sir.
To come back to your comments earlier on Sudan, you mentioned this concern about transshipment and weapons coming from overseas to Sudan. Could you sort of put a slightly finer point on it? Have you raised this with the UAE in your meetings that they need to stop providing support to the RSF? And have you got any commitment or any kind of
Yeah, look, none of these, neither side has their own factories for the most part, right? All these weapons are acquired from abroad. They have to come from somewhere else, and they have to come through somewhere else. So someone is allowing it to be shipped in, and someone is actually shipping it. So we've had the right and appropriate conversations with all sides of this conflict, because that is their leverage. Without their support, neither side can continue. So that's why we need to engage, and that's why we've engaged the parties involved in all of this. I don't want to find myself here in a position of picking on anybody other than to say that we think and we're hopeful that we can make some progress on this, but we know that in order to make progress on this, it will require outside actors to use their leverage and their pressure to make that come about, particularly this humanitarian truce, which is the first thing we want to achieve. We think that outside actors have the leverage and the influence over the players on the ground to bring about this humanitarian truce. And we are very focused on it. I had a conversation on it yesterday. We have spoken to the UAE, we've spoken to Saudi, we've spoken to Egypt, and this is not new. We've been talking to them. We signed a document with them in September at the UN. at the UN gatherings. We had previous meetings with them before that. So this is not a new engagement. It's just one that's had a higher sense of urgency given recent events there. But yeah, we're involved every single day trying to work through this because we do understand that and this is not new to this conflict. It is in many ways similar to what happened to happen in Gaza. What brought Hamas to the table, among other things, was the fact that some of the countries that had relationships with Hamas, like Qatar, like Turkey, played a very constructive role in bringing them to the table and pressuring them to sign an agreement. And we played a similar role on the other side. So, it's not unusual that you would involve outside actors in using leverage to bring parties to the table to agree on something. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. On Venezuela, what is the U.S. willing to commit if Maduro is ousted from power to ensure that the country doesn't plunge further into instability in sort of
Yeah,
a
I don't
power
have any
vacuum?
announcements on that right
And
now.
do
for
you see Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez as the heir apparents for power? in
Well, we don't
Venezuela?
believe Maduro's not legit. We've been pretty clear. We didn't recognize him as a legitimate president. The previous administration didn't as well. The first Trump administration didn't either. He's not the legitimately elected president. They had an election last year that was stolen, and everyone knows it. Even all the countries in the region know it. And but I don't really have anything to add other than what I've said today with regards to Venezuela.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for doing this. According to a poll by the Reagan Institute, 62% of all Americans support the use of military force against suspected drug traffickers in the Caribbean. And among MAGA Republicans, 90% support the military use against suspected drug traffickers in the Caribbean. So how does the State Department view or analyze these figures?
Yeah, I mean, we don't do foreign policy by poll, and our job is to carry out the directives of the president. The president was elected. Donald J. Trump was elected the President of the United States, and he promised that if elected, he would go after drug cartels, and that's what he's doing. He is keeping a promise he made to the American people upon which they elected him to be president. He told them he would protect this country, and that's what he's doing, and he told them he would go after drug cartels, and that's what he's doing. So it doesn't surprise me if that poll is accurate because the president's simply living up to the promises that he made when he ran for office. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Secretary, on Gaza, you've said repeatedly in this room now that this is peace is a process, that phase 2 could take next 2 to 3 years. Is there a possibility
To fully implement.
To fully
I mean,
implement.
You can't build buildings in one day. Right?
Is there a possibility in your mind that the status quo, more or less as we see it now, with this sort of insufficient flow of aid, periodic violations of the ceasefire by each side, a lack of reconstruction, and of course the absence of an international security force, that this could potentially continue more or less through the rest of the president's term? And if not, I'm not asking for a date, but I think we'd all like to know. We've heard from the president and yourself that there are all these countries that want to join the international security force. When will they deploy? Are we talking in the next year, in the next couple of years? And is there a certain amount of time that could pass at which point the administration, without an ISF, at which point the administration would green light or will green light Israel to resume its war?
The way to answer that question is this way. No one is arguing that the status quo is sustainable in the long term nor desirable. And that's why we have a sense of urgency about bringing phase 1 to its full completion, which is the establishment of the border peace and the Palestinian Technocratic Authority or organization that's going to be on the ground. And then the stabilization force comes closely thereafter. Once we've established that, we have a lot of confidence that we are going to have the donors for the reconstruction effort and for all the humanitarian support in the long-term building in phases 2 and phases 3. We just don't think that we're going to get to phase 2 or phase 3. We don't believe that we can have a successful donor conference, just as a real example, until people know they want to know who's in charge and they want to know that there's security. Okay? They want to make sure that who's going to pledge billions of dollars to build things that are going to get blown up again because a war starts. So they want to know who's in charge and they want to know that there's security. And that there'll be long-term stability. So no one would argue that what we have in place now is sustainable in the long term. We have to get to the completion of phase 1. I am confident we will. within the time frame necessary to make it successful. It's just not today, but hopefully very, very soon. We've made real progress. We made progress as late as yesterday in additional names for this Palestinian organization that's going to be the technocratic organization. So I think we're very close. I think we're going to get there. I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to get through phase 1. And then what I meant about taking years for phase 2 or phase 3 is not years to start it. I'm just being, to rebuild a place, to put buildings and rebuild an economy, it takes time. You'll have the donors, but you still have to have the equipment, you got to build, you have to do all that sort of thing. This is a long-term project. Phase 1 is not a long-term project. It has to happen. I'm confident it'll happen within a time frame that makes it successful. We're very committed to it, and so is everybody else. Everybody else in the region understands that there is no plan B. If this doesn't work, plan B or what's going to happen is a new war, and no one wants that. No one wants that.
So, Mr. Secretary, are you going to be able to tell us in the next year who is going to secure Gaza and
it'll have to happen
who is
much.
going
You're
to
talking about the
disarm?
stabilization force?
Yes.
Yeah. That'll have to happen much more than a year from now. That is the completion of phase 1. When we get through the establishment of the stabilization force, border peace, Palestinian group, stabilization force. All those things happen, boom, 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 1, 2, 3. They have to happen very quickly, not a year from now. This is something we're aiming at very soon. It has to. It's what we're focused on right now, like a laser. All right, yes, sir.
Secretary, thanks for all the time, and
it's not going to be 4 hours, I promise. It's an hour and a half.
You see the press corps is hungry for engagement here. I hope the State Department will return to regular press briefings soon. You got a great spokesperson's unit over there that's more than capable of handling it. A couple quick questions. The President directed you through executive order to explore sanctions of sectors and chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar is ground zero for the Muslim Brotherhood. This administration obviously has a very close relationship with the Qataris. How do you confront the Muslim Brotherhood without confronting the Qataris? That's my first question. Second question is on UNRWA. There's a report that the State Department is in deep discussions about possibly sanctioning UNRWA. What's your mindset on that, and do you feel there is any role for UNRWA absent humanitarian aid delivery in the future?
I think we can deliver humanitarian aid without UNRWA. I think UNRWA is a corrupted organization that's unsalvageable, period. And I think our policies reflect that. On the first point that you talked about, I think we'll have some announcements, and not today, early next week, on Muslim Brotherhood. Designating groups there's a series of internal steps, despite what people may or may not perceive. There are things we have to meet, criteria we have to meet, information we have to have, boxes we have to check, legal reviews that have to happen, and that takes time. So, but I think there'll be announcements very soon on that, probably as early, if not today, early this next week.
Do you expect pushback from the Qataris?
Well, I'm not going to comment on which segments of the Muslim Brotherhood. As you know, there are different chapters, for lack of a better term, and individuals spread throughout the world. But the President's issued his executive order, and we're working through the execution of it. And we'll get to what we need to get to. A lot of this obviously depends, from a legal review standpoint. You have to have certain information that you can cite in order to justify the designation. So we're working through that. We'll have some announcements next week, and they won't be the last announcements that we have.
Mr.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary, thank you for doing this today. This conversation between my colleagues and yourself paints a seemingly chaotic and hostile world at times. So very simply and generally put, what do you believe is the biggest threat facing the United States today?
I don't know we live in a world where we have a single threat that we can identify. I think there are multiple things that you look, both short-term and long-term. As I pointed to in the hemisphere, in our own hemisphere, closest to home geographically, it's the rise and the power of transnational criminal terrorist group who are destabilizing nation states throughout the region and pose a direct threat to the United States through overthrowing governments, destabilizing these governments, leading to mass migration and certainly the trafficking of drugs, and also providing fertile ground for potential, outside of hemisphere actors to act within our hemisphere in the long term. That's a major threat. I think we face some challenges. And then we know the United States industrial base, the United States supply chains become dangerously dependent on other countries for many of the things that are elemental and critical to not just sustaining what we have, but building the economy of the 21st century. And so building up our industrial base and diversifying our supply chains are a critical threat that the United States needs to confront. I think related to that, not directly related to the Department of State, but somewhat related to the United States, is building of our defense industrial base as well. One of the challenges that we face, and so does much of the world, in the West, is the ability to build weaponry at a scale and scope necessary, not just to deal with the threats of today, but to innovate and develop those tomorrow. It simply just takes too long to build up defense articles, get them to market, in a timely fashion. And not only do we complain about that, but we have allies who want to buy things from us that we just haven't been able to produce fast enough. And so the president's made that a priority to confront. I think beyond that, I think you would argue that in the big picture, long term, we have to understand that the United States has interests in every part of the world that are related to these two threats. In the case of Africa, we see countries that have extraordinary opportunity to develop economically, the youngest population in the world, and the United States wants to have relationships both